But first, Rod Kohler, who is the Managing Director at Revolution Sports. He will share his experiences with us working with his clients in other sports, including Travelex, Rolex, Heineken, Standard Bank, and Adidas. Rod.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, everyone, for inviting me along here to speak today. I must admit, I feel a bit of a fraud. We've had some amazing presentations today about some pretty serious sort of stuff, and I get to talk about the sort of fun things involved in sponsorship and everything which goes on with that. I just want to kind of follow up on what Jason said there, is that, yeah, I run Revolution Sports. It's my company with a business partner of mine. And although we do work in a range of other sports, we have also done a lot of work in racing as well. I'm conscious that so often people probably go to conferences and are told how to do sponsorship by people who have no idea what it's like to work in racing. We know that racing is a very difficult and challenging market for sponsorship. So everything I'm about to say is sympathetic to racing, and therefore hopefully not too much of an outsider point of view. I wanted to go through today, not in any kind of particular detail and drilling down into how people are activating sponsorships, because there's a range of ways, and that's clearly a big sector at the moment. What I wanted to do is to try and go through some big picture things on how brands are approaching sponsorship and how it's a little bit different now than possibly how it has been over the last 10 or 20 years, and just sort of share our experiences of how brands are doing things slightly differently. I think all of us in this room probably have a pretty good idea about what sponsorship is. We all have a view. We've probably been out there and found some sponsors. We possibly even work with sponsors. I think in the most basic level, it's clearly a relationship between a rights holder and a brand. It's clearly a partnership with benefits. It's cash and it's brand prestige for the rights owner, and it's profile and it's hospitality and PR for the brand. We have a great feeling, and I don't know if you share it with us, but sponsorship can give a dull brand a personality. You know, brands can attach themselves to exciting sports, and they can feed off those sports, and that gives that brand that personality. And clearly, sponsorship is an opportunity for brands to engage much closer with their audience. So that's a sort of, I would describe as a typical sponsorship model. I think there's probably a case to be said that actually there's nothing wrong with that model. You know, you can see there the kind of various range of activation activities going on. There's clearly nothing wrong with that, and there's a lot of brands out there who follow that model and don't do anything more than that. And in fact, we work with a number of them who don't want to go down this, a lot of the sort of digital activation side of things. So I'm not criticizing that. We're just seeing, I think, again, as I said, from a big picture point of view, we're seeing a number of things, a number of ways brands are approaching sponsorship a bit differently now. I think I'm going to give sort of very brief case studies on each of these 6 topics. But if you look at things like duration, 5 to 10 year deals within the sponsorship world now are not unusual. I think it's always been the case previously where it's been a 3-year deal, possibly with a 2-year exit where you can get out if you want to, or you can re-sign again for a 3-year, or re-sign for another 3-year. We're seeing a lot more now where people are signing right from the word go for 5 years and even for 10 years, and I'll show you a couple of examples of that next. We're also finding, one of our big clients, as Jason mentioned, is Rolex. We're finding a lot of brands now are, in a sense, moving away from business objectives, going into sponsorship for a business objective. And they're much more doing it because it fits. It's part of their brand. If you look at someone like Rolex, all of their sponsorships are long-term. They sponsor 5 specific sports. And they do that because that's part of their brand. It's not about an objective. It's not about hitting targets or anything like that. It's just about that's their DNA. We see a lot of work now in partnership, use of this word partnership, and I know it's come up throughout today. Actually brands working with sporting events in genuine partnerships, and that's sort of linked as well to the sort of 5 and 10 year deals and duration of these deals. Things can't get done in 2 years. They need a longer partnership together. So that's, in a sense, those two are kind of closely linked. Jason mentioned earlier about Red Bull. There's a lot of that. We see a lot more of that. I know that Danone are going to talk about that a bit more later, about creating and owning events rather than trying to find something off the shelf. A lot more people now beginning to kind of create things, own things. And I'll talk a little bit about Red Bull in a second. The kind of commercial side of the model is also with regards to brands becoming a bit more of a kind of a business relationship. People are no longer wanting the rights. They want to get into partnership. They want to get into bed with a venue or a stadium or an event on the basis that it's a win-win for both sides. Not just about the branding rights, but it's, I'm going to pay you a certain amount of money, but I know I'm going to make a certain amount of money back. And we see a lot of that in the UK, and again, I'm sure in racecourses as well around the world, that kind of commercial arrangement is much more common. And I think the digital, and the role of digital, and I said I don't want to go down too much in terms of talking about activation, but the role of digital has made it a case that the brands can no longer go to an event and not activate it. The consumers are now are expecting it. They can't just sit back, do a deal, and leave it there. I think with the role of sort of digital and social media, you have to be doing something. Brands have to be doing something. So I wanted to just throw out some examples here that we know about. And so, as I said, long-term deals not unusual. Look at Nike and Rory, 10-year deal. Rolex and Formula One, a 10-year deal, rumored to be $20 million, euros, pounds a year for massive branding. Arguably, you would turn around and say that's a very, very good deal. If you're going to play in that market, in that sector, £20 million, 20 million euros doesn't really get you a title sponsorship of a Formula One team, but it gets you a certain lot of branding at each and every Grand Prix. So that's the kind of published sort of figures, but it's a 10-year deal. Longines and the FEI in the equestrian sports, another 10-year deal. Again, that's the sort of the published figures. These are well-established brands, and it's not necessarily something we could turn around to sponsors at racecourses and say, right, we want to sign you in for a 10-year deal. These are well-established. These are very confident brands who've been sponsoring for a long, long time. But also, I think it's a case of them wanting to block others as well, having the confidence to block others, not wanting anybody else to get in there. And I think that's possibly one of the backgrounds as to why they're doing these long deals. Sponsorship as part of a brand DNA. We just have this sort of theory internally with us about long-term deals. We all know about brands who've been involved in sponsorship for a long time. I think, again, if you look at someone like Rolex and equestrian sport, they've been there since 1957. Coca-Cola and FIFA have been there in 1978. Tag Heuer and McLaren, an example, have been there since 1985. Again, this is confident. These are long-term deals, but they're not about business objectives. Again, I think I use Rolex and equestrian sport. It's not about shifting product. It's not about short-termism. It's a long-term thing. It's part of the brand's DNA. It's part of what the brand is. And I think it's true with Coca-Cola. And again, clearly Coca-Cola, a different one in terms of shifting a bit more for kind of fast-moving consumer good product, shifting cans of Coke, especially around it. But it's not. We don't think it's not about that. It's much more about the sort of being aligned with an event on a long-term basis. It's just what you do. It's what your brand does, and we've kind of really seen a kind of increase in that recently. I think more emphasis here on the partnership, and I think this has been around a while. Clearly, IBM and Wimbledon have been around together for a long time. I know Microsoft and the NFL, I think, is a relatively new deal. I think I've definitely seen some unfortunate press coverage of the Microsoft deal in terms of people calling it an iPad, and all the coaches who have been issued with their Surface tablets of all the commentators are calling it iPads rather than Surface tablets. But the SAS example there, I don't know, SAS is a very big global kind of data analytics company. They've just signed a deal with the Washington Redskins, and they also do a lot of work with British Rowing, Great GB Rowing, which is obviously a multiple gold medal winning company, someone who we work with. And just interesting in terms of it's a partnership. They're paying a small amount of money, but they're providing a massive amount of data in kind. Analyzing the rowers' data, the top-level elite rowers' data, using all of that. Previously, it was in 10 different silos. They're bringing it all together. It's a partnership, in fact, in that respect. Also, interestingly, is they're using at the elite level, they're working together, and at the lower level, it's a membership body, British Rowing. It relies on annual subscriptions. and they're working very, very closely at the membership level to make sure that they keep that renewal going year on year. People are not going away, not leaving it. Every single person who leaves, basically they need to find the money from somewhere else. So the sort of membership and the renewal of the membership is very, very important. So I think that sort of partnership element has a really, really big role to play across all sports, you know, horse racing in particular, but, you know, clearly there's a lot of areas there which is kind of highly relevant sort of going forward. Ownership, not sponsorship. I think if, I know from personal point of view, my brother-in-law is a senior sponsorship director in London for Red Bull. If I ever turned around to him and said, what are you sponsoring at the moment, he'd probably slap me. Red Bull doesn't do sponsorship, it does ownership, it does events, and it does events to create its own content, which get fed into its Red Bull media house, which gets fed into online or its own TV channels. So it's a move away from the traditional sponsorship model. People going to Red Bull looking for sponsorship are going to get short shrift. People with events which Red Bull can kind of own and can create and work together with, they're going to get listened to. But they don't do sponsorship. It's as simple as that. And I think the Oracle and the Alfred Dunhill there are just examples of kind of sponsorships where, you know, brands have, clearly they've got a story. Both of those examples have got a story behind them, but it's moving away from just a pure sponsorship and much more into a sort of ownership area. And this is the commercial deals. Certainly one we work with, in particular, the Verve Clique and the Polo and the Travelex and the Toyota Formula One. Toyota, clearly a few years ago now, but just an example of that. Again, people can get very particular and very snobbish about sponsorship, and they start talking about brand values, they start talking about branding and all the sort of rights and benefits you can get to it. That at its heart, sponsorship can also be a commercial deal. It's a pure commercial deal. Travelex, for instance, did a €3 million a year deal with a fledgling Toyota team for its first 3 years of its existence. Fairly decent branding, you can see there on the front wing, they're also on the wing mirror, €3 million, very good deal to get in there. Why did Travelex do it? Sure, a little bit of global branding, but the team was never going to be winning, so it was always going to be down the starting list and not winning races. So from a TV branding point of view, not brilliant return. But the team said to Travelex, we will get you into Toyota back in Japan, and we want to be doing your foreign exchange. So it was a purely, for Travelex, it was a kind of a £3 million gamble to get into Toyota, into Japan, to be doing their foreign exchange. Plus, on top of everything which they were doing, so every £1 million worth of business or €1 million worth of business, they would pay the team more money. So again, from a principal point of view, it's just a business relationship with a few branding benefits. Stowford Press there is an example with the ECB. They get official pouring rights. Again, we've probably all worked with brands wanting rights, catering rights, or pouring rights at venues and at racetracks and everything, and that's a kind of exactly that commercial deal. They get a little bit of branding, but they get the commercial rights, or they get the pouring rights where they can sell. And Verve Clique is exactly the same, sponsoring a very high-profile event in the UK, sort of the premier polo event in the UK every year, but they're doing it basically to sell more bottles of champagne. At its heart, clearly it's a very social thing. But so it's just a business relationship. It's got to get it. You know, sometimes one needs to move away a little bit from the sort of being too precious about sort of brand values, etc. And I think this is just an example, clearly, from in the digital sector. The ones we work with here are the shirt sponsor of Aston Villa Football Club in the Premier League, a fairly, dare I say it, bland brand who is using sponsorship to kind of make itself a little bit more glamorous and a little bit more relevant. Intuit QuickBooks is a sort of accounting package software for small and medium-sized enterprises, SME businesses. They're sponsoring Aston Villa. They're trying to target local businesses around Birmingham and in the Midlands. And they've created there a sort of a game, a very simple sort of game, which they're sending out via small business organizations to try and encourage people to play, to register, to win tickets, just sort of connecting with it. Just an example there of saying even the blandest of brands using sponsorship to make themselves a little bit more sexy are doing this activation work, and there's really, one cannot sit back anymore and not do anything and be a little bit complacent about it. So even they are doing it. I thought it'd just be interesting, just something which is kind of live example at the moment on the Rugby World Cup, just as a sort of observation more than anything else, is the sponsorship structure that they've done at the Rugby World Cup is 6. They've got a lot of sponsors, but they have 6 kind of global sponsors. And I think a lot of the time when people are doing sponsorship packages and sponsorship rights packages, brands buy into a sponsorship package, but they're not activating all of their rights. And we just thought it's quite interesting in terms of this structure here with the Rugby World Cup going on at the moment, is that they've basically given each brand a specific area which they can work on, which they can focus on. So, for instance, the Heineken, they have the coin toss. That's their one focus. All their kind of activation activity can be around that Heineken coin toss. MasterCard, for instance, has the official Man of the Match award. Land Rover and DHL, they're moving the cup around, they're doing the trophy tours. And I think what's interesting about this example is that it clearly gives the sponsors more control over their rights, but actually it also enables them to work a little bit more closely together. Anyone who's ever worked with a number of sponsors on one event, for instance, they always want to try and get sponsors to integrate and activate together. But in actual fact, sponsors, probably quite rightly, are a little bit paranoid. They want to protect their rights. They don't want to be sharing things with everyone, what all their kind of rivals are doing. And this is a really, really good example. And I don't know what the coverage has been like over here in France, but certainly in the UK, it's a very, very, very high-profile event. It's getting some great cut through. Clearly, we're in the middle of our football season, and yet, the Rugby World Cup is still sort of dominating newspaper coverage and things. And maybe, partly because of that, it's because all these brands are activating particular things rather than trying to activate everything. And that's enabled them to work a bit more closely together, do things together, but knowing that no one's going to be trampling and crossing over from their activity. Just a last couple of slides, just an observation on sort of racing and sponsorship. I don't know how many kind of marketing people there are here within the room who have to go out and find sponsors. As I said earlier, we totally understand it's a very, very tricky world. And just a sort of, as I said, a few observations. I mean, I think apart from, this is probably more based on the UK, clearly example, but I don't know whether it's probably the same is true globally. I mean, sponsorship in racing is clearly dominated by companies with a vested interest in the sport, apart from people the likes of Investec and Kipco, who are clearly kind of more consumer brands. I think there's a lot of it which is betting companies, and I think that's, there's no reason why there shouldn't be. I think I'm chatting to a couple of guys over lunch, racing is still a very difficult sport for non-racing fans to understand. If you've been born or brought up in the sport, you get it, you understand it, you get passionate about it, you go racing more than once a year. But if you're coming from outside the sport and you know nothing about horses, it's still very, very complicated to understand. I think the bottom slide there, I don't know how clearly you can see that, but that's the finishing straight at Cheltenham. So our biggest jump racing, the end of season finale, and I think there's probably 7 bookmaking boards there on the final straight. Maybe 8, maybe 9. It's a complete and utter kind of confusion. So we talk there about brand cut through. Would that happen in any other sport in terms of packaging rights together and giving benefits to a sponsor? I doubt it very, very much. So the race is probably sponsored by a bookmaker, and then on top of that, you've got bookmakers advertising down the course. So really, really, very, very difficult. And I think, again, I totally understand that the reason, sponsorship in racing is a continual churn process. People are, chasing sponsors continually, often for one race because it's linked to the prize money. It's so closely linked to the prize money. At least it is in the UK. And so I totally get it. Without that sponsor for that race, your prize money goes down. We have a massive debate going on in the racing industry at the moment in the UK about the level of prize money and how it's, not up there, not at the right sort of levels as it should be compared to other countries. So this kind of prize money thing and its link to sponsorship is a really, really big issue. Again, no one has the answers, and there's a lot of work to be done. I mean, we think there's a lot of amazingly good work has been done for Racing for Change, Great British Racing in the UK. I think that's it's a case study for any country and racing in any country. They've just done some amazing, amazing stuff. But I sort of feel, based on our other kind of work we do outside the sport, but, this one race, one sponsor idea, 6 races in a day, and you've got 6 different sponsors, and then you have 6 different advertisers on the boards, and you have, you know, it's a real clutter, and there's got to be some way in which you can move away from this one race, one sponsor. Certainly, just in base on terms of what we were talking about, some of the things earlier, personally, we feel, you know, exclusivity at racecourses, and it's beginning to happen, obviously, at Ascot, and, you know, they're in a very lucky situation because they are Ascot, clearly, but, you know, make sponsors pay for it, but give them more exclusivity, give them more branding, give them more space, don't have competitors in there. Easier said than done, I totally know, I totally appreciate it, but that sort of approach, that sort of mindset is what's going on in other sports and within the sort of sponsorship sector. Why shouldn't it happen in racing? We always say to rights holders and to people selling rights, they should be doing a lot more to give their, you know, perceived added value to sponsors. People want to go to more events. They want more activation. They always want to do that. There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of inventory which racecourses in particular can give to sponsors. They probably don't realize they've even got it. They probably don't even realize there's a value to it or not. But there's a lot of value within racecourses which they can give to people, and sponsors then feel better about it. They feel better about themselves. They feel like they're getting something for free. It's, you know, it's like, and it's just human nature. But there is definitely that sort of added value. And I think, you know, personally, again, talking to people sort of outside the sport and other brands, you know, there's not enough, you know, activation going on. There's a lot of brands who sponsor racing. They come in, they take the hospitality box. That's the only reason they do it. You know, they like to be a bit showy, and they like to say, "Look, we're sponsoring a race, and all your clients feel great about it," and everything like that. You know, in a sense, it's the responsibility of the racecourse to say, "No, you can't do that. You know, you've got to be doing more. You've got to be promoting it. You've got to be doing some PR in newspapers. You've got to be doing more branding. You've got to, you know, doing competitions. Even most simple of things should be doing more, especially in the fact that we've got this digital age. It's really not that difficult, I think, with you know, company Facebooks and Twitters and all that, you know, all the stuff which we've been talking about today. I really don't think it's difficult to ask brands to be doing more. So that's it. Just a very quick, brief sort of overview of our thoughts on racing, and thank you very much. Thank you, Jason.